fiscal calendar year now in 2020. There we go. All right, hello and welcome to another panel discussion. A lot of you are probably finishing up your and as a result of that, you're probably looking towards 2021 and figuring out how am I going to build a really good pipeline going into 2021. Well, we have a great panel here today to help you with that and to understand how you can do it best. And I'm going to introduce them one by one, but I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give a short bio. So maybe we kick off with Jason Jordan, who is in Virginia. Jason, if you want to just spend a couple of moments telling people who you are.
Sure. I'm Jason Jordan, of course, and I have had a career in management consulting, training, developing sales leadership teams. Right now, I've been in and out of interim sales roles for some private equity company sales leadership roles. So I'm a sales management person.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. And also joining us in Virginia as well is Elinor Stutz. Hey, Elinor.
Hey, thank you for having me today. My career has been varied. I've had a number of different entrepreneurial endeavors, and then I became a pioneer saleswoman. And I wasn't permitted training, and that was my gift in disguise. I was expected to fail as being just a typical woman, but not memorizing a script was the best thing that could ever have happened to me. I had fun with my clientele.
Excellent, excellent. And Elinor's anything but typical. So there you go. And Wendy Weiss, who's up in New York. How you doing, Wendy?
I am fabulous. Happy to be here. And I'm Wendy Weiss. My company is Cold Calling Results. We work on the front end of the funnel. If you want to build a pipeline in 2021, you need to fill the funnel with qualified opportunities, and that's what we teach.
Excellent. All right, well, let's get straight into it and let's talk about building pipeline for 2021. So, here's the first question, and maybe Jason, you want to start off with this. Has 2020 changed the way we need to build pipeline for 2021, or is it largely the same, or is it some combination?
Well, I think that the sales motion is the same. I mean, customers have needs, they have a buying process, and salespeople have to meet those needs and go along with this buyer on their buying journey. But the obvious thing is that we've been put into this virtual world. And I think that, again, the process isn't different, but the demands on the salesperson are much different. And I mean this in a very tactical way. I did some research on webcam preferences earlier in the year. And more than 80% of people want to see the person that they're talking to, right? The day of the telephone is gone for now. And with that comes responsibility. I mean, we've all been on calls with video calls with incredibly unsightly visions. And so in my research, I basically found that 81% of people were more likely to buy from a salesperson who has a more professional presence, right? So like we're at camera at eye level, lighting, reasonable background. So I think the motion's the same. I think the challenge is that we're just selling in a different mode, and building credibility and trust virtually is much more difficult than doing it, in person.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it is interesting. One of the things that I discovered early on is that there are some salespeople very, very good in person, very good in working rooms and all of that, but actually struggled with putting a camera on at the beginning and operating in a virtual sense. But I agree 100% I think you have to humanize it. And even if the other person doesn't put their camera on, you should still put your camera on, because it's worth putting a face to the name and doing exactly what you just said.
Yep.
And I would like to disagree slightly with what Jason said.
Excellent.
In that the phone is not dead. We have to get people to the video call. And so I have no argument with anything that you said about the video call, but we have to have a mechanism to get them there. That's right. And one mechanism is certainly the telephone. And as a matter of fact,
continue on that for a moment, Wendy, and let me know, is the telephone harder right now or easier given where we are in with this pandemic?
Well, it's very interesting because there was an article in the New York Times a couple of months ago where they reported the telephone usage. They interviewed managers at Verizon. Telephone usage, both commercial and personal lines, was higher than they typically see on Mother's Day. Mother's Day is the highest call volume day of the year until now. And now on a daily basis, they're seeing calls exceeding, the call volume exceeding that what they typically see on Mother's Day. So people actually are talking on the phone more.
Yeah. And by the way, the second highest day is the day after Mother's Day for all the people who forgot to call on Mother's Day.
Nice.
Yeah. And Elinor, what about you? What do you think? Has anything changed in 2020 for prospecting and building pipeline for 2021?
Well, I'm going to combine what both Wendy and Jason said, is that I was one of the first adapters of social media. I was excited to meet people from around the world. And I found as of recently, what has changed, Twitter used to be the #1 platform for me, but it's gotten terribly political and you have to be careful. So turns out LinkedIn is the go-to platform, in my opinion, for business. But it's still the personal touch, whether it's phone or in-person meeting or online. Read the person's profile first and connect personally with them, what you have in common, and then the pipeline begins to build. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and just on that whole thing around networking and connecting, one of the things I think in LinkedIn now, as we know, LinkedIn is very important, but it's become very spammy in many ways, and it's become very noisy, and it's almost difficult at times to connect with the right people or to create valuable conversations on LinkedIn. Is this something that you've experienced, Elinor, or are you still finding it very, very effective?
Yeah, on the one hand, there are people telling me they can teach me how to sell, and I have to laugh. Why don't you read my profile first? Mm-hmm. On the other hand, you can do a search specifically if you want executives, salespeople, whomever. And you can make really good connections, which I have done. And I find it's an excellent way to meet more people and add to the pipeline. Mm-hmm. But you have to know how. And I'm tied in with one of the sales training programs for LinkedIn.
Oh, excellent. So what do you think, maybe Wendy, if you want to kick this one off, what do you think is one of the more overlooked pipeline building tactics or strategies?
Well, I'm going to leap right back to the phone. It's very interesting because we work with a lot of clients that were used to going to trade shows. They were used to doing a lot of networking. They go to conferences, or they're even door knocking. They're walking into places of business. Well, they can't really do any of those things anymore. And it's also very interesting to me because I set up a Google alert on the term cold calling, and searches for people that are searching for information on cold calling goes up like 100% every week. So the telephone is actually a great tool to use to connect to people, to take them, whether, one day we'll again get in our cars and go see people, or whether it's to take them to a virtual meeting to have an in-depth conversation. It's a great way to just introduce yourself to a prospect that you'd like to have a conversation with.
Yeah, no, I think that's all good points. And I do think that sometimes there's been a lot of noise around the phone, and it has played into the people who quite frankly don't like picking up the phone, and I think it's given a lot of people excuses not to pick up the phone. And what about you, Jason? What do you think are some of the most overlooked strategies or tactics when it comes to pipeline building?
Well, Wendy's right about the telephone. I'm working with a client right now, and I ran a correlation. I looked at all of their 2020 activities they had logged into CRM, and I correlated that with the size of their pipeline they'd built over that time. And the only thing that was really strongly correlated was picking up the telephone. Email was exactly zero correlation with the size of their pipeline. And it's just it's a fear that people have. And I think there are some challenges now. People aren't at their offices, right? They're not sitting at their desks. People are more difficult to get a hold of, has been my experience in 2020, unless you could find their cell phone number. But yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing in almost every single industry is just picking up the phone, and people fear it for whatever reason and fall back on, more sterile things like emails.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is interesting, though. I think that that during this period, because of people were at home and maybe a little more isolated, if you could get the number and you could get through to them, you find people were actually maybe a little bit more open to conversation than before, because they were just craving conversation.
Yeah, I find people are either more friendly or more angry. Those are the only two.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's nothing. I just think that that's probably a good metaphor or analogy for the whole world right now. Exactly. There's no in between.
Also, early in the pandemic, everything was chaos, but most companies have figured out how to forward calls now. So if you call an office line, it's probably ringing in somebody's kitchen, or their garage, or wherever it is they're selling, doing their job. And cell phone numbers, there are a myriad of websites where you can do searches and get cell phone numbers, so you can do that. Or you could leave a really good voicemail and get them to call you back.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
How about you, Elinor? What about overlooked tactics or strategies?
Okay, well, I was going to say I used to make my fair share of calls, probably more than most, but I'm a visual and I love Zoom. So I can see the person's reactions to what I'm saying, as well as hear them and produce questions. So I think combining all the platforms or the methods of contacting people work well. And then in conversations, you ask people. But the other part of it, I was an early attendee of the Sales Enablement Society. And that's where they started blending marketing and sales together, which I thought was brilliant. But when you add social media, when you put the mix, I call it a 360-degree business development process, that really gives you a far broader reach. And I approach it that way.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point as well. Anybody got anything to add to any other hidden or overlooked strategies or tactics for pipeline building? All right, maybe we'll move on then to common mistakes or myths around pipeline building. And maybe Wendy, if you want to kick this one off, because I do think there are common myths around it. Cold calling is dead is one of them, obviously, and there are mistakes that are often made. What is your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, certainly, cold calling doesn't work the way it did 20 years ago. It still works. It just works very differently, and you need the right approach. You need to be very targeted. You need to be strategic, and you need the right tools. And in terms of developing a pipeline, you need to have the sales manager is key here, or the business owner, whoever is driving the organization, the sales organization. You need a very clear definition of what a lead is, what a prospect is that goes into the pipeline, because connecting with somebody on LinkedIn doesn't make them a lead. And so what is it, what's the definition? And every step, what I see in working with my clients is the more the sales manager, whoever manages that sales team, the more they're involved, defining the process, defining what needs to be done, what is what's a qualified prospect, what's not, those kind of things, the more successful the entire process becomes.
Yeah, and I think that's a message close to your heart, Jason, is like maybe one of the most overlooked or parts of pipeline building is maybe the role that the sales manager plays.
Well, sales manager is huge. I mean, they're the most important tool you have, more important than CRM, more important than a website. But you ask about myths. I think there's one very fundamental myth about the sales pipeline that persists in every organization, which is that bigger is better. And I've worked with companies. In fact, I'll give you one example. I worked with a company once. I mean, you know who they are. It's a global company, And we were looking at their sales managers and, analyzing them in a bunch of different ways. And this one sales manager, his salespeople were selling 50% more stuff year to date, but on average, their sales pipeline was 33% smaller than the rest of their peers. And so when we got into it, this gentleman had, of course, his forecasting call every Friday, as everyone does. But on Monday, he had a separate call that was just about new opportunities. And he would quiz the salespeople about the new opportunities. Like, is there an incumbent? Yes. Then why do you think we're going to dislodge the incumbent?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or do we know who the economic buyer is? No, don't put it in the pipeline until you come back and know who the economic buyer is. And this idea, to Wendy's point, of defining, criteria, qualification criteria, what is a good lead? When does it get in the pipeline? Can really defeat the bigger is better attitude and lead to a really small, not really small, smaller, but efficient, but more efficient pipeline, more productive. But, it just takes a leap of faith to take a deal out of your pipeline, right? Even if there's the smallest chance a salesperson thinks they're going to outmaneuver the incumbent and overcome the objections. It's not often that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm glad you brought that point up. I call it the feel good funnel, is when you stuff a load of leads into the early stages of your funnel. It makes you feel really good because you go, wow, and then you can say to your manager or the executive, you can say, yeah, things are a little rough right now, but look what's going to be like in like 3 or 4 months with all the stuff. And then 3 or 4 months, you just say the same thing again. Because most of it fell out. And I do agree, that is I think one of the hardest things, and I've been through it myself in the past, is when you get very disciplined about your pipeline and what goes into it, it does shrink. And for those watching maybe from above, it gets very nerve-wracking when they go, wow, your pipeline is like a third of what it used to be. What's going on there? And you say, well, I'm actually more confident, and you can see the results are coming. But it takes a leap of faith, as you say, because we like big funnels, right?
Yeah, this was it was an interesting study because in addition to salespeople having smaller pipelines, they were also doing more prospecting, right? They were literally doing much more prospecting, but they were much more judicious about what they were putting into the pipeline. So it's a lesson for all, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important lesson, and one I think that is overdue. People should definitely take into 2021. How about you, Elinor? What's some mistakes or myths about pipeline building?
Yeah, you brought a funny story to mind. On that first job, I remember the manager asking how much I was going to bring in that first month. And I went home, I said to my husband, how the heck do I know? So he said, just tell him the quota amount. And then if you make it, great. And if you don't, you'll be excused because it's your first month. So I started with that. But I learned to always do more than what was required of me. Just keep focused. And that's the whole key for anything you do. Stay focused, not busy, focused on your clientele, what they need. And as you have more conversations, no matter how you communicate, ask them, does this sound of interest? What will it take for you to have more interest? And as the conversations continue, you never do a one-punch sale, at least I don't. I build the relationship. That's my hallmark. So at any rate, once they say, yes, I'm very interested, and I say, what will it take to finalize this? What do you need from me? What will differentiate me from everyone else in the field? And they'll give me that list. That's when I put it in the pipeline. So yeah, I always had a small pipeline, but boy, it was pretty accurate.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, you just reminded me, I spoke recently to a former NBA player, Walter Bond, who is now a coach and a consultant as well. And that's one of the things that he said about how he made it into the NBA when he was 23. How he made it there was that he outworked everybody else. He outworked his peers. He said, there were others who were better, maybe more skillful, but he outworked them. And he said that that's in life. Just don't let anybody outwork you.
That's right.
Yeah. Wendy, do you have anything to add to, especially what Jason was saying again about the sales manager, because you touched on that earlier?
Yeah, it is so vitally important. One of the things that I see all the time with clients is they'll say to me, oh, we're going to hire a new salesperson. And I'll say, great, what do you have in place for them? And the answer invariably is like nothing. And so before you run out and hire all these new salespeople, because what I see is they bring in salespeople and they say, go find some prospects, go sell some stuff. They teach them everything they need to know about whatever it is they're selling, but they never teach them how to find a good qualified prospect and then what to do with them. Mm-hmm. So the more that sales manager can define the process and what makes a good prospect, what disqualifies a prospect, and forgive me, Elinor, scripts. People that are brand new don't know what to say, so help them figure it out. Give them some messaging so that they know how they're going to, what are the points they want to make, how they're going to proceed, what are the questions they need to ask. Lay it all out, and the chances of that new hire succeeding go way up.
Yeah.
May I reply to that?
Yes, of course.
No argument here. It would have been nice if I had been given at least some ideas of what to say or to get across. I'm not arguing. But on the other hand, you need to build credibility and trust. So when you come across as your authentic self, changing the vocabulary to who you are, but still getting the point across, that's the winning combination, in my opinion.
Yeah,
we will agree to disagree.
John,
okay, and that's what a panel discussion is for.
John, let me emphasize something that Wendy said, because I think it's worth pulling out of the conversation and addressing. It's one thing to have qualification criteria, and I think that most companies don't really have good, documented, and well-understood qualification criteria. I think it's equally as important to have disqualification criteria, to know what a bad deal is. Because what you're really trying to do is keep the bad out, right? This is like a continuous improvement, eliminate the errors. And so qualification criteria already missing from the table, but also want to be, what does a bad deal look like that we just don't want? Because, in my mind, a qualified deal is one that you can win and you want to win. And there are deals that you just don't want.
Yeah, and I think I'm glad you brought that up, Jason, because I think that's a really important point, because sometimes I think companies don't really calculate the cost of an opportunity, like you say, and sometimes chase bad business that turns out to either be loss-making immediately, or over time, suck the life out of the organization, because they don't always count in the amount of people who get dragged into a bad deal to help out here or help out there, calculate their time, and before you know it, that deal is underwater. But I think you're right. I think if you ask most organizations, they will give you, here's what a qualified lead looks like, here's what a good buyer target looks like. But if you say, okay, what does a bad one look like, they won't be able to tell you that. Yeah. So when it comes to pipeline building, we were just talking there about looking at the right opportunities and all of that. How well defined, Jason, maybe just ask you, when you work with companies, how well defined do you think the target buyers and the right kind of opportunities tend to be? Or is that an area that people could do some more work on?
Well, I think companies are getting smart about buyer personas, right? I mean, that's something that we didn't talk about 15 or 20 years ago, that now, most any sophisticated organization has a marketing department, will have customer segmentation and buyer persona. What I think people don't really understand is that there's more to it than just the buyer, right? I mean, the chief financial officer can be involved in a bunch of different types of sales, right? Some transactional, some consultative, some important, some unimportant. We kind of tend to treat the role as though they're always playing the same character in the purchase decision. So I think, generally speaking, we're getting more sophisticated. I think there's still some dimensions of qualification of buyers and opportunities that we're missing.
Yeah. What about you, Wendy? How well do you think generally people define their buyers and define what good opportunities look like or good prospects look like?
Unfortunately, not really enough. It's what I see a lot is the definition is just too broad. And so what we teach is the need to really micro target. And when you have that micro target, it's easier to find them. It's easier to create messaging that's going to resonate with that particular target. they are more likely to close because you've done a micro target and you're speaking specifically to that type of prospect, and you don't waste your time chasing after inappropriate prospects. So unfortunately, what we see a lot is I'm working with a client and I'll say, describe an ideal prospect for you, or describe an ideal prospect for your team. And they'll say, oh, any company that has 5 to 10,000 employees. And then I have to, well, we need to narrow that down a little bit.
Yeah.
And so the more specific they are, the better the whole thing works.
Yeah, because that goes back again to, I mean, if you define it as, 5 to 10,000 employees or whatever, I mean, that goes back to the feel-good funnel. It just creates a massive market for you, but not in reality. How about you, Elinor? What do you think on this?
I agree 100% with Wendy on that. And what I used to do, and I suggest, is that you pick an industry that you really enjoy working with, or that intrigues you, that you want to learn more and become almost an expert on that industry, and work with the companies within. And then over time, in a shorter period of time, you do become seen as a leader in that field, because you're aware of the news that's affecting them, what's helping them, how the stock market's affecting them, and what they can do better. And you can have a more intelligent conversation when you know about the industry. So you start visiting various companies of those different industries, but also have a personal set of values and priorities. So if somebody isn't treating you properly, know that that's not the right company, even though it's in the right industry. Like Wendy said, you have to drill down and get real specific of who you're willing to work with and who you're not, and when you're going to walk away. And then that frees your time up for companies that will treat you better, and you have a more lively conversation, and then eventually more robust sales.
Absolutely. And Jason, how much going forward do salespeople need to educate themselves more about business and the business of business, and how the business landscape may be changing for their prospects and clients? Because I think this is an area that sometimes gets overlooked a little bit, by some salespeople, is really learning about the business of business and the business of their prospects.
Yeah, well, I'll say two things about that. One is, by default, a salesperson will get trained on the products, right? Got to know the products. They'll often get trained on the sales process, but they never get trained on the customers. They never get trained on the buying process. And that's why I think it's so, when people used to have sales meetings, I would say you should bring in a customer and just ask them about your experience buying from you and buying from your competitors. So I think that generally speaking, there's not enough preparation for salespeople to understand their customers in general. And then your second point is, to your point of kind of business acumen, I guess, that salespeople don't understand features and functions. And I think we've gotten to the point of understanding benefits, but I'm not sure that people can quantify those benefits. And smart companies have ROI calculators and things like that the sales team can use to not only demonstrate a number, but to demonstrate an understanding of the buyer's business. And that's what buyers really want, is someone who's familiar with their business, their issues, and has experience solving them. And so it's one of the reasons that customers specifically like when you have like an industry-oriented sales force, because you walk into the conversation having background and understanding issues and having experience with other customers. So it's I think generally speaking, there's less education on customers than we need. And if there is one thing you need to understand, it's the mechanics of the buyer's financials.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really important point. And I think it's to be honest, even more critical point given where we are today, because your prospects, the industries you sell into, they may be moving a little bit, pivoting, they may be adapting to where we're to the current situation. So if you're not on top of this, you're not really going to get their attention, because you're not really going to be able to have an intelligent conversation with them if you're still talking about their business from last year, from 2019, as opposed to where they're going to 2021. And what's your thoughts on that, Wendy?
Yeah, we actually because we teach prospecting. So we teach the front end of filling that funnel. We actually have our clients go through an exercise where they interview their customers, because when you're creating prospecting messaging and prospecting scripts, the better you can speak your prospect's language and talk about their issues, the more successful you're going to be. So we actually have them interview their customers. We give them a list of questions they need to get answers for, and we use those answers to create scripts, so that the idea is when they're prospecting and they're speaking with a prospect for the first time, the prospect feels like they are talking to them. They're talking to themselves, because they're hearing their own issues coming back at them in their own language.
Yeah. Have you seen anything change in particular this year, Wendy, when you're talking to people about their business or anything? Are there things that they want to talk about that maybe is a little bit different from before?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the transition to doing everything remotely, in terms of keeping sales teams accountable. If they were used to having them all together, and now they're not together, and a lot of my clients are asking about how to manage them, how to make sure they're doing what they need to be doing, how to be able to help them if they need help, because they can't just walk into the meeting room and say, what do you need help with? So those kind of issues are really huge.
Yeah. And then Elinor, one of the things that came out of this pandemic, I think, is that it really exposed some organizations who maybe had paid lip service to digital processes and technology and all of that, and then had to play catch up or struggle to make that transition very quickly. Going forward, how important do you see digital processes and technologies and technology in facilitating sales and better connections with customers and more targeting and being more focused?
It's extremely important. I'll put out there, I've always been a little bit ahead of the crowd as far as entering sales and then entering the world of online digital media, social media. And on Twitter, they have the articles on the latest technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics. It's all extremely important. And I'm reading now, I don't know if it's true, but I am reading that eventually our currency will go away too, in the form of digital currency. Is it true? I don't know, but the only way to be prepared is to study about it, figure out what's ahead, and if the possibility really exists. What I find, most people are not willing to put in the extra hours to do their research, to study on the new, and then apply it to what they hear from customers and ask them questions. And the other differentiator for me is I never talked a lot. I always saw myself as an introvert. And so I had learned early on to ask questions. And I came up with a phrase, QLC, question, listen, clarify, admit what you don't understand, the jargon they may be using, have them explain. And again, that goes to trust and credibility. But by incorporating all this and your willingness to continue learning and asking how it affects the clientele and what they're doing about it, really has them focusing on you, turns the tables.
No, I love that. I love that QLC. Excellent. And Jason, what about the importance of digital process and technology as we move into 2021?
Well, I think there's been a trend line there for decades, right? I mean, technology is becoming increasingly important, and it'll become increasingly more important. And I think that, to your point, it's laying bare a lot of organizations who thought they had this, right? Like, oh yeah, we got that. And then in reality, they don't. And I don't know if the challenge for the sales force is any greater than any other part of the organization, but unquestionably, the future marches on.
Yeah, it really does. And I think the discipline, I think that's probably what we're going to see a lot more of is a much more disciplined approach, because when times are good and everything, it's very easy to paper over the cracks, right? Because the times are good, ignore glitches in the system. But as you move forward, I think discipline is going to be incredibly important, because you can overwhelm people with technology too, or you can put in technology and never put in the processes to back it up, right?
Yeah, for me, LinkedIn has become as crowded with spam as my inbox, my mailbox. And so but it's where we are, right?
Yeah, it's where, and I think that's where we have to
To the
teach
point,
people to be more discerning.
Yeah, to your point of discipline, though. I mean, you have to use these tools properly, or else it's just junk.
Yeah, here's an interesting, a totally unscientific survey that I did on LinkedIn a little while ago, because it was just fascinating me about when I connected, or when people sent me connection requests, and I read, oh, okay, interesting, and hit connect, and I get that automated email, that ping. That pops up in LinkedIn, and I tend to sometimes I'll wait a few days and go through, looking for people, going through people who want to connect with me. So if I accept, 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever in a row, it's like ping, 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 and all these things pop up. So I asked in this unscientific survey on LinkedIn, how many people liked those messages, how many people checked them later, how many people completely ignored them, and how many people deleted them immediately. And 75 to 80% of the respondents were either delete immediately or ignore till later. So just back to that point about, you got to be a little bit savvier and smarter how you leverage things like LinkedIn. What do you think on that, Wendy?
Oh, I absolutely agree. And it's the same thing about telephone prospecting. You have to say something that's compelling and relevant, because if you don't, you're just annoying. So whether you're leaving that voicemail, you're sending an email, you're texting somebody, you're sending them a message on LinkedIn, you don't want to just regurgitate all the things you do and send them a calendar link, because that doesn't work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I mean, I always think it's like, imagine if you just got introduced to somebody and you immediately just went straight into a rote sales pitch. Like, people would be like, "What? Who are you?" But it seems that people think that that's acceptable on places like LinkedIn. Okay, Elinor, as we come to the end here, what is one piece of advice that you would give to salespeople going into 2021? If they were to do nothing else except add this to their arsenal, what would it be?
It would be to figure out what you ultimately want to accomplish, and set goals with timelines to be more effective, more efficient, and check those priorities and values and stick to them as you're achieving your goals, and you will be successful. It's motivation and perseverance that makes the difference.
Yeah, I love that, motivation, perseverance, and it's that discipline word again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good. How about you, Jason? What's one piece of advice you give to salespeople going into 2021?
Well, it's the same advice I give to anyone going into any year as a salesperson: is focus on your best opportunities and your best customers. I mean, we talked a little bit about it before, but with the same tools, with the same skill set, with the same amount of time, if you're focused on better opportunities and better customers, you'll be more productive.
Yeah, so you would definitely encourage people to spend more time on their qualifying criteria and making sure that there's a lot of discipline around that, particularly obviously with the sales manager.
Yeah, I think the front end and the back end of the sales process are of the relationship are what typically get screwed up, right? So the prospecting stuff we talked about, people don't do it well. They don't use the phone, scared to pick it up. It correlates more strongly than anything else in my recent experience. And then on the back end, it's kind of funny. People will do, so this gets back to the idea of getting to know your customers and how they look at you. A lot of people will do kind of post-mortem interviews, and they lose a deal. They'll jump in and try to, and I've not found those to be really all that valuable. They're just telling you what you're bad at.
Yeah.
But where I've had a lot of insight is when I interview customers after we won the deal. And there's this honeymoon period where they'll tell you anything, and you learn what you do well and what you need to accentuate. They'll tell you what the customers did, the competitors did that was good and bad. And so I think just getting to know the customer, understanding who the best customers are, and going after those is probably the keys to the kingdom at any time in your career.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic advice. And how about you, Wendy? What's one piece of advice you would give to salespeople going into 2021?
Well, I'll have to agree with Elinor about setting your goals. You need to be strategic. You need to have a clearly defined plan that includes action items that you are going to execute. It needs to be realistic. Don't say you're going to dial the phone 500 times a day, because we know you're not going to do that. Even with a dialer, that might be a stretch. So, be realistic, but clearly defined goals. And I want to make one comment, what Elinor also said about perseverance, which my first career was I danced in a ballet company. And I believe that everything I know in life, I learned in ballet class. This is what I learned in ballet class: warm up, rehearse, perform. So warm up, do your plan, figure out the objectives, figure out your goals, what's the target, figure it all out. Rehearse, you got to practice. That's why we sales trainers love role playing. Practice, then execute. The problem is most people just jump to the performance, and that's why they don't do so well. Warm up, rehearse, perform.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic piece of advice, and I liken it as well to, martial arts is my thing, and I think people often get surprised when, especially early on, when they come to class and they see senior people have been doing it a long time, and we're back practicing the basics over and over again, and the master is constantly correcting you on basics, because to your point, we love to just jump in and once we think we're good at something, we start ignoring the basics and the fundamentals, and that's what I think undoes a lot of people.
Totally agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, thank you very much, all three of you. Jason Jordan in Virginia, Elinor Stutz in Virginia, and Wendy Weiss up in New York. I think there's a lot of fascinating and great input here and ideas for people to take away from this. Wish you all the best for building your pipeline in 2021. Please do visit our guests. Please do go visit their websites and learn more about them. Maybe reach out and connect them. I think, as you can see, and as you've heard, coaching and getting good advice is critical. So if there's one last thing I would say to people is invest in your sales teams in 2021. Invest in your sales manager and invest in your salespeople, and reach out and get some help, because it is research has proven that those organizations who are more disciplined, better trained, better run, obviously perform better. So thank you all for joining us. Thanks to the three panelists, and I will see you all for another panel discussion really soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.